Marcus Chen never expected his diplomatic mission to the Zephyrian Empire to end with him being thrown into a pit full of dragons. The alien nobles laughed as the guards dragged him across the polished obsidian floor of the throne room, his protests falling on deaf ears. Your species thinks it can negotiate with the mighty Zephyrian Empire. High Chancellor Vextar's voice dripped with amusement. His scaled features twisted into what passed for a smile among his kind. Humans are nothing but primitive mammals who crawled out of their caves yesterday. The other nobles chittered their agreement, their crystalline wings catching the light from the massive chandeliers overhead. The Zephyrians were proud of their draconic heritage, having evolved from creatures that humans would have called dragons millions of years ago. They stood 12 feet tall with scales that shifted color based on their emotions, and wings that could carry them through the vacuum of space. Marcus struggled against the guard's grip, but their strength was far beyond human capabilities. The Terran Federation came here in good faith, he said, trying to maintain his composure despite the fear creeping up his spine. We offer trade agreements, cultural exchange, and mutual defense treaties. Defense? Vextar's scales shifted to a mocking shade of purple. What could your soft-skinned species possibly offer us in terms of defense? You can barely leave your home system without those crude metal ships. The throne room erupted in laughter. Marcus had spent 6 months learning Zephyrian customs and language, thinking he could bridge the gap between their species. The Federation had high hopes for this first contact situation. The Zephyrians controlled 12 star systems and possessed technology that could benefit both civilizations. Perhaps, Vextar continued, rising from his crystal throne, we should demonstrate why your species should bow to us instead of offering partnerships. He gestured with a clawed hand toward a section of the floor that began to iris open, revealing a deep pit below. Behold the dragon pit, where we test the worthiness of those who would claim to be our equals. The smell hit Marcus first. It was ancient and primal, like sulfur mixed with ozone and something else he couldn't identify. The pit stretched down at least 100 feet, its walls carved from natural rock and lined with what looked like claw marks. At the bottom, shapes moved in the shadows. For 10,000 years, Vextar announced to the assembled court, we have used the dragon pit to test warriors and settle disputes. Only the strongest survive an encounter with the Primarchs. Primarchs? Marcus asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. The original forms of our species, explained Vextar with obvious pride. Before we evolved intelligence and civilization, before we learned to walk upright and speak, they are what we once were, pure instinct, pure power, pure fury. They have been preserved in this pit for millennia, feeding on those who displease us. The shapes in the pit moved again, and Marcus caught a glimpse of something massive and serpentine. A low rumble echoed up from the depths, a sound that made his bones vibrate and his primitive brain scream warnings. Usually, Vextar said, his scales now shifting to an excited gold color, we only cast criminals and enemies into the pit. But today we make an exception. Today, we cast a human diplomat into the pit to show the galaxy what happens to those who overestimate their importance. The guards began dragging Marcus toward the edge. He could see down into the darkness now, and what he saw made his blood freeze. 3 massive creatures prowled the bottom of the pit. They were easily 40 feet long, with scales that seemed to absorb light, wings that could blot out the sun, and eyes that glowed with predatory intelligence. They were beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. Wait, Marcus said, his diplomatic training kicking in despite his fear. If I survive this, what then? Surely even your traditions would demand that I be treated with respect. Vextar's laughter was like glass breaking. Survive? Human, no one survives the Primarchs. They are apex predators from an age when our world was young. Even our greatest warriors consider it an honor to die facing them in single combat. But if someone did survive? Impossible. But theoretically, our oldest laws state that one who gains the respect of the Primarchs would be considered worthy of leading them. A quaint notion from our barbaric past. Vextar's scales shifted to amused pink. Do not worry, human. Your death will be quick. The Primarchs prefer their prey fresh. The guards lifted Marcus over the edge. For a moment he hung suspended above the pit, staring down at the 3 creatures that had begun to take notice of the commotion above. They moved with fluid grace despite their massive size, and their glowing eyes were now fixed on him. Any last words, human? Vextar asked mockingly. Marcus looked around at the assembled nobles, their faces filled with cruel anticipation. He thought about Earth, about the Federation's hopes for peaceful contact with the Zephyrians. He thought about the message pods that would carry news of his death back to human space, and how it might mean war between their species. "Yes," he said quietly. "I hope you remember this moment." The guards released him. Marcus fell through the darkness, the jeers and laughter of the Zephyrian nobles fading above him. The pit walls rushed past, marked with thousands of years of claw marks from previous victims and the creatures that had killed them. He hit the sandy floor hard, rolling to absorb the impact as best he could. Pain shot through his left ankle, probably sprained or worse. But he was alive, and that was more than most people thrown into this pit could say. The 3 Primarchs had moved back when he landed, forming a loose circle around him. Up close, they were even more magnificent and terrifying than he had imagined. The largest of the 3, its scales a deep midnight blue, approached slowly. Its head was the size of a small car, and its teeth were like ivory daggers. It lowered its massive head toward Marcus, and he could feel its breath washing over him like a hot wind. This was it. This was how Marcus Chen, diplomat of the Terran Federation, would die. But as the creature's glowing eyes met his, something unexpected happened. The dragon blinked first. The midnight blue Primarch pulled its head back slightly, tilting it to one side as it studied Marcus. Its eyes, which had seemed purely predatory moments before, now held something that looked almost like curiosity. The other 2 dragons flanked it, their postures tense but not immediately aggressive. Marcus forced himself to remain still despite every instinct screaming at him to run. There was nowhere to run anyway. The pit walls were smooth and impossibly high. His only chance was to somehow survive the next few minutes, though he had no idea how. Above, the Zephyrian nobles had grown quiet, probably confused by the lack of immediate carnage. Marcus could hear Vextar's voice echoing down the pit, though the words were too faint to make out clearly. The largest dragon took another step closer, and Marcus noticed something strange. The creature's movements were deliberate, almost careful, as if it were trying not to frighten him. That made no sense. These were supposed to be mindless killing machines, preserved from a prehistoric age when the Zephyrians' ancestors ruled through pure savagery. "Easy there," Marcus whispered, not sure if the creature could understand him but feeling compelled to speak anyway. "I'm not here to hurt you." The dragon's head tilted further and a low rumble came from its throat. Not the threatening growl Marcus expected, but something almost inquisitive. The sound resonated through his chest, and he felt an odd sensation, as if the creature were somehow probing his mind. The second dragon, smaller but with scales that gleamed like polished silver, moved to Marcus's left. Its approach was equally cautious, and when it lowered its head toward him, Marcus caught sight of something that made his breath catch. Scars. Old ones, crisscrossing the creature's neck and snout. These weren't mindless beasts that had been preserved in some kind of stasis. They showed signs of experience, of learning, of survival. "You're not what they said you were, are you?" Marcus said softly. The silver dragon's eyes met his, and Marcus felt that same odd mental pressure. It was gentle but insistent, as if the creature were trying to communicate something beyond words. The third dragon, its scales a deep emerald green, had positioned itself behind Marcus, completing the circle. Above, the voices of the nobles grew more agitated. Marcus caught fragments of their conversation drifting down from the throne room. They were arguing about something, their voices sharp with confusion and growing concern. Marcus slowly reached into his diplomatic pouch, moving carefully to avoid startling the dragons. His fingers found the small translation device that had been helping him communicate with the Zephyrians. It was programmed with linguistic analysis software, designed to detect and translate unknown languages. If these creatures were truly intelligent, maybe it could help. The midnight blue dragon watched his movements with keen interest. When Marcus activated the device, its soft hum seemed to catch all 3 dragons' attention immediately. Their head movements became more animated, almost excited. "Can you understand me?" Marcus asked, holding up the device. The response was immediate and shocking. All 3 dragons began to vocalize simultaneously, their voices creating a complex harmony of tones and frequencies. The translation device's display lit up with scrolling text as its processors worked to analyze the sounds. Translation, attempt in progress. Language pattern detected. Advanced syntax structures identified. Translation complete. The text that appeared on the screen made Marcus's heart race. Finally, Someone who listens instead of screams. The voice belonged to the Midnight Blue Dragon, its words rendered in standard Terran English by the translation device. Marcus looked up at the massive creature in amazement. "You can talk?" "We have always been able to talk," replied the silver dragon, her voice carrying a distinctly feminine tone through the translator. "The question is whether anyone bothers to listen." The Emerald Dragon spoke next, his voice deep and resonant. "For 10,000 years they have thrown prey into our domain. Warriors who sought glory, criminals who sought redemption, fools who thought they could prove their worth by facing us in combat. All of them came with weapons and aggression, ready to fight or die. But you," said the Midnight Blue Dragon, lowering his great head until he was eye level with Marcus. "You came with words and questions. You came seeking understanding, not violence." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cool air in the pit. "The Zephyrians don't know, do they? They think you're just animals." "Our descendants have forgotten much," the Silver Dragon said sadly. "They evolved beyond their origins but lost touch with their roots. They see us as relics of their primitive past, useful only for testing courage and dispensing death. But you're not primitives at all," Marcus realized. "You're the originals, the first Zephyrians before they changed, before they built their empire." "We are what they once were," confirmed the Emerald Dragon. "Before they learned to build ships that sail between stars, before they conquered other worlds, we ruled this planet through wisdom as much as strength. We were the first to develop language, the first to create art, the first to look up at the stars and wonder what lay beyond." Above them, the arguing had grown louder. Marcus could hear Vextar's voice rising above the others, demanding to know why the humans still lived. Other voices joined in, some calling for guards to investigate, others insisting that the test must be allowed to run its course according to tradition. "They're going to come down here," Marcus said, looking up at the distant opening. "When they realize what's happening, they'll try to stop it." "Let them come," said the Midnight Blue Dragon, drawing himself up to his full impressive height. "We have endured their ignorance for 10 millennia. Perhaps it is time they remembered who their ancestors truly were." "My name is Marcus Chen," Marcus said, extending his hand toward the great dragon. "I'm a diplomat from Earth representing the human species." The dragon studied his outstretched hand for a moment, then carefully extended one massive claw. The tip was as long as Marcus's finger but moved with surprising delicacy to touch his palm. "I am Thalarin," the dragon said, "once called the Keeper of Memories. These are my companions, Cyrelia the Star Watcher," he gestured to the Silver Dragon, "and Varon the Truth Seeker," indicating the Emerald One. "Keeper of Memories?" Marcus asked. "Before our kind learned to write, before they built their crystal libraries and data cores, we preserved the history of our people in song and story. I remember the old ways, the ancient codes of honor that once governed our civilization." Cyrelia moved closer, her silver scales catching what little light filtered down from above. "And I studied the heavens, mapping the movements of stars and planets before our descendants built their first crude spacecraft. The knowledge of navigation, of understanding the cosmos itself, began with dragons like me." Varon's emerald scales shifted to a deeper green as he spoke. "And I was charged with determining truth from falsehood, wisdom from folly. I could read the hearts of those who came before me, separate the worthy from the unworthy." Marcus felt the weight of history pressing down on him. These weren't just ancient creatures preserved in a pit. They were living libraries, the keepers of knowledge and wisdom that the modern Zephyrian Empire had forgotten in their rush toward technological advancement. "The Code of Honor," Marcus said suddenly. "Vextar mentioned that ancient laws stated anyone who gained your respect would be worthy of leading you. He was talking about real laws, wasn't he? Laws that you remember." Thalarin's eyes gleamed with approval. "Clever human." "Yes, the old laws still bind us, even if our descendants have forgotten them. Any being who can stand before the Three Keepers and earn our recognition through wisdom rather than violence gains the right to speak for us." "And what does that mean exactly?" Cirelia's laugh was like silver bells ringing. "It means, Marcus Chen of Earth, that you have just become the first being in 10,000 years to hold authority over the Primarchs. And according to the oldest laws of the Zephyrian people, that gives you a very interesting legal status indeed." The sound of approaching footsteps echoed down from above as guards began their descent into the pit, using mechanical platforms. Marcus could see their lights cutting through the darkness, moving slowly down the carved walls. Vextar's voice carried clearly now, filled with irritation and confusion. How is the human still alive? The Primarch should have devoured him within moments. Thaloran's massive head turned upward, his eyes narrowing as he watched the approaching lights. Cerelia, Varan, positions of respect. It is time our descendants remembered the proper protocols. The three dragons moved with practiced precision, forming a triangular formation around Marcus. Each dragon lowered their head in a specific manner, wings spread in what Marcus somehow understood was a ceremonial pose. The translation device hummed as Thaloran began to speak in what seemed to be an ancient form of the Zephyrian language. By the light of the first star and the wisdom of the deep earth, we, the three keepers of the old ways, recognize this being as worthy of voice. Let all who witness this moment know that Marcus Chen of the human species has earned the right of command through courage, wisdom, and respect for the ancient laws. The platform carrying Vextar and 6 heavily armed guards reached the bottom of the pit. The High Chancellor's scales had shifted to a confused mix of colors as he took in the scene before him. The guards raised their energy weapons but seemed uncertain about their targets. What sorcery is this? Vextar demanded, his voice echoing off the pit walls. Why do the Primarchs not attack? Have you somehow drugged them, human? Marcus stepped forward, the translation device in his hand. Behind him, the 3 dragons maintained their ceremonial positions, their massive forms creating an impressive backdrop. He had studied Zephyrian law during his diplomatic preparation, but most of it dealt with modern statutes and trade regulations. However, he remembered reading about something called the Foundation Codes, ancient laws that supposedly predated the current government. High Chancellor Vextar, Marcus said formally, I invoke the right of ancient challenge as witnessed by the 3 keepers and recognized under the Foundation Codes of the Zephyrian Empire. Vextar's scales shifted to an alarmed orange. The Foundation Codes? Those are myths, human. Stories from our primitive past, are they? Marcus gestured to the dragons behind him. Then perhaps you should explain to these myths why they've been preserving those very codes for 10,000 years. Thaloran spoke, his voice carrying the weight of millennia through the translation device. High Chancellor Vexitar, descendant of the Skyriders clan. You stand in the presence of the Keeper of Memories. I remember when your ancestor, Veltor the Wise, helped establish the very laws you now call myths. Do you deny the words of your own bloodline's founder? The color drained from Vexitar's scales, leaving them a pale, shocked white. You speak of Veltor? But that was... The records say many things, Cerelia interjected, her silver form gleaming as she moved closer to the group. But records can be lost, altered, or forgotten. Memory endures. I watched your ancestors' constellation calculations, the ones that led to your people's first journey beyond this world. Would you like me to recite them? Vextar stumbled backward, his guards looking between him and the dragons with growing confusion. One of them, a younger Zephyrian with bright blue scales, spoke up nervously. Sir, the ancient texts do mention the 3 keepers. In the Foundation archive there are references to... Silence, Vextar snapped, but his voice lacked conviction. He stared at the dragons as if seeing them for the first time. Even if you are who you claim to be, this human is still an outsider. The ancient laws could not possibly apply to him. Varan stepped forward, his emerald scales shifting to a deep, authoritative green. The Foundation Codes make no distinction of species, Chancellor. They speak of any being of wisdom and courage who earns the respect of the 3 keepers. These laws were written when our people first encountered other intelligent species on this world, long before you conquered the stars. Marcus felt a surge of hope. You mean other species lived here before? Many, Thaloran confirmed. The Zephyrians were not the first to achieve intelligence on this world, merely the most successful at survival. The ancient laws were designed to allow cooperation between all thinking beings. Your descendants, he fixed his gaze on Vextar, chose to forget this wisdom when they began their expansion into space. This is impossible, Vextar muttered. But his protests were growing weaker. The Council of Nobles will never accept this. A human cannot claim rights under our laws. Cannot or will not? Marcus asked. According to what I've learned here, the Foundation Codes supersede all later legislation. If these laws are truly part of your legal system, then they must be honored regardless of political convenience. The young guard spoke up again, his voice gaining confidence. Sir, I studied ancient law at the academy. The foundation codes are mentioned in our constitutional documents. They're listed as the source of governmental authority. If they're being invoked legitimately, then they must be recognized, finished another guard, this one older with silver markings on his scales. My family has served the throne for centuries, Chancellor. We swore oaths to uphold all Zephyrian law, ancient and modern. Vextar's scales shifted through several colors rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. You're asking me to accept that a human, a member of a species we first encountered last year, has somehow gained authority over our most sacred artifacts? Not authority, Marcus corrected. Partnership. According to what I understand of the ancient laws, the right of command isn't about domination. It's about speaking for those who have been silenced. Your ancestors created these laws to ensure that wisdom would always have a voice, regardless of politics or prejudice. Sirelia moved closer to Vextar, her massive silver head lowering to his level. When she spoke, her voice carried a sadness that seemed to echo through the centuries. Child of the sky, we have watched for 10 millennia, as our descendants forgot the lessons that made them great. You conquered worlds through strength, but lost the wisdom that originally lifted you to the stars. You built an empire, but forgot how to build understanding. This human, Thaloran added, gesturing toward Marcus with one massive wing, came here not as a conqueror, but as a seeker of peace. He faced death with courage and chose words over weapons. He listened when others would have fought. These are the qualities the ancient laws were designed to recognize and protect. Varan's deep voice resonated through the pit. We have tested thousands over the years, Chancellor. Warriors who sought glory, nobles who demanded respect, criminals who begged for mercy. All of them failed because they came seeking to take rather than to give. This human came seeking to understand. Marcus could see the conflict in Vextar's expression. The Chancellor's political instincts warred with what was clearly a growing realization that he was facing a legitimate legal situation. The guards around him seemed equally torn between their duty to protect the government and their understanding of the law they had sworn to uphold. Even if I accept this, Vextar said slowly, the Council of Nobles will never agree to negotiate with humans on equal terms. They see your species as inferior. Then perhaps, Marcus said quietly, it's time they learned otherwise. The Foundation codes don't just give me the right to speak for the three keepers. They give me the right to challenge any law or decision that contradicts the ancient wisdom, including decisions about how the Zephyrian Empire treats other species. The implications of this statement hit Vextar like a physical blow. His scales shifted to a deep, alarmed purple. You're talking about challenging our entire foreign policy, our expansion doctrine, your assumption that might makes right, Marcus finished. Yes, Chancellor, I am. Above them, the sounds of commotion from the throne room were growing louder. More guards were arriving, and Marcus could hear the voices of other nobles demanding to know what was happening in the pit. Thaloran looked upward with ancient eyes. It seems, Marcus Chen of Earth, that your real test is about to begin. The throne room erupted into chaos as Marcus emerged from the dragon pit, flanked by the three keepers. The massive dragons had to fold their wings tightly to fit through the iris opening. But their presence filled the space with an ancient authority that made even the most arrogant nobles step backward. Dozens of Zephyrian courtiers pressed against the walls, their scales shifting through every color of fear and confusion. Some had never seen the Primarchs outside of the pit, while others had witnessed executions but never imagined seeing the dragons act as escorts rather than executioners. Behold, Thaloran's voice boomed through the throne room, the translation device amplifying his words in both Zephyrian and Standard Terran. We return to the halls of our descendants no longer as prisoners of ignorance but as witnesses to the ancient laws. High Chancellor Vextar stumbled along behind them, his scales still pale with shock. The guards who had descended into the pit flanked him, their weapons lowered but their expressions bewildered. The young guard who had spoken about ancient law kept glancing between Marcus and the dragons with something approaching awe. This is unprecedented, shouted Noble Kexri, an elderly Zephyrian whose golden scales marked him as a member of the highest aristocracy. The Primarchs are sacred relics, not diplomatic representatives. Sacred relics who happen to be the living embodiment of your constitutional foundation, Marcus replied calmly, and who have just reminded me of some very interesting facts about Zephyrian law. Sirelia moved to Marcus's right side, her silver form reflecting the light from the chandeliers above. Noble Kexri of the Golden Wing clan, she said, her voice carrying across the throne room. "I remember when your ancestor, Kextar the Builder, helped design the first star charts that guided your people to their second world. He understood that true strength comes from unity, not domination." Kexri's golden scales flickered with shock. How could you possibly know?" "Because I was there," Sirelia said simply. "I guided him through the calculations that made your empire possible. Before your people forgot that wisdom and cooperation built their success, not conquest and intimidation." Varan stepped forward, his emerald scales catching the light. "I also remember the truth-seeker codes that Kextar helped establish. Laws that required all disputes to be settled through wisdom rather than force, understanding rather than violence. Laws that specifically prohibited the subjugation of intelligent species for the sake of expansion." The throne room fell silent, except for the soft sounds of nervous movement among the nobles. Marcus could see several of them exchanging glances, their scales shifting to worried colors as they began to understand the implications of what they were hearing. "These laws," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber, "are they still part of Zephyrian constitutional doctrine?" Fextar looked around desperately, as if seeking support from the other nobles. The constitutional documents do reference the Foundation codes as the source of governmental authority. But you hoped everyone had forgotten what those codes actually said?" Thaloran finished, his massive head turning toward the assembled nobles. "You built your empire on the foundations laid by wiser ancestors, then convinced yourselves that their wisdom no longer applied." Noble Ziara, a middle-aged Zephyrian with distinctive purple markings, stepped forward from the crowd. "Even if the ancient laws are valid, this human has no standing to invoke them. He is not a Zephyrian citizen." "The Foundation codes make no such distinction," Varan replied, his voice resonating with authority. "They speak of any being of intelligence and good faith who seeks cooperation over conquest. Species was irrelevant to their creators because they understood a truth their descendants forgot." "Which is?" Ziara demanded. "That wisdom can emerge from any source," Marcus answered, "and that true strength comes from alliance, not isolation. Your ancestors wrote these laws specifically to prevent their descendants from making the mistake of believing they were inherently superior to other intelligent species." He pulled out a datapad he had prepared during his months of study. "I've spent considerable time researching Zephyrian history, including what records remain of your pre-expansion period. Your people didn't conquer this world through force alone. You succeeded because you learned from other species, traded with them, formed alliances with them." Sirelia's head moved in what Marcus recognized as a nod. "The Crystal Weavers taught us to work with living crystal, which became the basis for your technology. The Deep Crawlers showed us how to extract metals from the planetary core. The Windsingers shared their knowledge of atmospheric dynamics, which enabled your first flight." "What happened to them?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Thaloran's voice carried a note of profound sadness. "They were declared primitive as the Zephyrians developed spaceflight. Some were relocated to reservations. Others were enslaved. The rest were simply forgotten as their populations dwindled." The silence that followed this revelation was deafening. Several nobles had their scales shift to ashamed grays and browns, while others maintained defiant reds and oranges. Noble Kexri spoke first, his voice smaller than before. "The historical records, they speak of early cooperation, but they indicate these species were technologically inferior. Records written by the victors," Varan said bluntly. "I was there when the first Crystal Weaver cities were abandoned. There was nothing inferior about their technology or their intelligence. They simply trusted their Zephyrian allies not to betray them." Marcus felt the weight of the moment. "This is why the Foundation codes were written, isn't it? To prevent exactly this kind of historical revisionism, to ensure that future generations would remember the price of arrogance." "The codes contain specific provisions," Thaloran confirmed, "requiring any expansion beyond the home system to be conducted through peaceful contact and mutual benefit. They also mandate that any species capable of interstellar communication must be approached as equals, not subjects." Vextar's scales had shifted to a defeated gray. "Are you saying that our entire colonial policy violates our own fundamental laws?" "Not just violates them," Marcus said quietly. "It's built on deliberately ignoring them. And according to what I understand of the Foundation codes, That gives any affected species the right to demand a review of all policies and treaties. The implications crashed over the throne room like a wave. If Marcus was right, if the Foundation codes truly superseded modern legislation, then every conquest, every forced treaty, every subjugation of another species could potentially be challenged under Zephyrian law. Noble Ziara's voice was barely a whisper. How many species have we? 47 intelligent species across 12 star systems, Sirelia answered. We have counted. We have remembered, because that is what keepers do. Varan moved closer to the assembled nobles, his emerald eyes reflecting ancient wisdom. Each conquest weakened the Empire's foundation. Each forced treaty violated the principles that made your people great. You built an empire on the corpse of your own integrity. But it doesn't have to stay that way, Marcus added, sensing an opportunity. The Foundation codes don't just prohibit unjust expansion. They provide a framework for correcting past mistakes, for building genuine alliances based on mutual respect and benefit. Thaloran's massive head swung toward Marcus. You propose to use our own ancient laws to reform our modern empire? I propose, Marcus said, his voice growing stronger with conviction, to help the Zephyrian people remember who they used to be, and maybe in the process show them who they could become again. High Chancellor Vexitar looked around the throne room at the sea of confused and concerned faces. This is a complete restructuring of our government's foundation. The council will have to, said the young guard from earlier, stepping forward despite protocol. If the Foundation codes are being legitimately invoked, if the three keepers are confirming their validity, then we're bound by our own oaths to recognize them. Other guards throughout the throne room began to nod their agreement. Marcus realized that many of them had probably studied the ancient laws as part of their training, even if their leaders had forgotten them. So what happens now? Vexitar asked, his voice hollow with the realization that everything was about to change. Marcus looked at the three dragons, then at the assembled nobles, and finally at the guards whose oaths to uphold all Zephyrian law suddenly meant something very different than it had an hour ago. Now, he said, we call a constitutional assembly, and we remind the Zephyrian Empire what justice actually looks like. The Constitutional Assembly convened 3 days later in the ancient Hall of Voices, a massive amphitheater carved into the mountain beneath the capital city. It had been used for such gatherings thousands of years ago, but had been abandoned when the Zephyrian government moved to the modern palace complex above. Marcus stood at the center of the circular chamber, surrounded by representatives from every major clan and noble house in the Zephyrian Empire. The three keepers occupied a raised platform behind him, their massive forms serving as both protection and testament to the legitimacy of his position. The atmosphere was tense. Many of the nobles had arrived in full ceremonial armor, their scales displaying aggressive reds and oranges. They had spent the past 3 days attempting to find legal loopholes or precedents that could overturn the invocation of the Foundation codes. They had failed. This assembly, announced Elder Voxtar, the oldest living member of the Noble Council, is called to order under the ancient protocols. We gather to determine the validity of the claims made regarding the Foundation codes and their application to current imperial policy. Voxtar's scales were a neutral silver gray, marking his attempt to remain impartial. Despite his obvious displeasure with the situation, he had served the Empire for over 3 centuries and had never expected to see his final years disrupted by constitutional challenges. The human delegate claims that our expansion policies violate our own fundamental laws. Voxtar continued, the three keepers support this claim. We must determine whether these ancient laws truly supersede our modern legislation. Noble Kelvash, a military commander whose red scales indicated his militant nature, stood first. I call for the immediate dismissal of these charges. No outsider has the right to challenge Zephyrian sovereignty, regardless of what ancient texts may claim. The Foundation codes disagree, Thaloran's voice rumbled through the chamber, causing several nobles to flinch at the volume. They specifically state that any being who earns the respect of the keepers gains the right to speak for justice, regardless of origin. But these codes are thousands of years old, Kelvash protested. They were written for a different time, a different society. Sirelia moved forward slightly, her silver scales gleaming in the chamber's crystal lighting. The codes were written to be timeless, Commander Kelvash. Your ancestor, Kelthan the Protector, helped craft them specifically to prevent future generations from abandoning justice for convenience. Marcus watched as Kelvash's aggressive red scales flickered with uncertainty. It seemed that every noble family in the Empire had ancestors who had helped establish the very laws their descendants now wanted to ignore. "Let's examine the specific charges," Marcus said, activating a holographic display that showed the Foundation codes alongside modern imperial law. The codes require that all first contact with intelligent species be conducted peacefully, with offers of mutual cooperation and trade. They prohibit the use of force or coercion to establish dominance over other civilizations. The display showed a long list of species that had been contacted by the Zephyrian Empire over the past few millennia. The pattern was consistent: initial contact, assessment of military capabilities, and then either forced integration or subjugation. The Helix Coalition, Marcus continued, pointing to one entry, was given an ultimatum: join the Empire as a tributary state or face orbital bombardment. The Crystal Communes were forced to provide workers for Zephyrian mining operations under threat of total annihilation. The Ringworlds were simply conquered outright when they refused to surrender their trade routes. Varan spoke from his position on the platform, his voice carrying across the chamber with absolute authority. Each of these actions violated the Truth-Seeker codes that require honest negotiation and mutual benefit in all dealings with other intelligent species. Noble Zexira, whose purple scales indicated her role as a trade minister, stood to speak. But these policies created prosperity for our people. Our expansion brought resources and opportunities that benefited millions of Zephyrian citizens. Built on the suffering of billions of non-Zephyrian beings, Marcus replied. The Foundation codes explicitly reject the idea that benefit to one's own species justifies harm to others. They were written by Zephyrians who understood that true prosperity comes from cooperation, not exploitation. He gestured to the holographic display, which now showed economic data from the early years of Zephyrian expansion. Look at the historical records. The first 2 centuries of expansion, when your people still followed the Foundation codes, were the most prosperous in Zephyrian history. Trade partnerships, technological exchange, and cultural cooperation created wealth that exceeded anything achieved through conquest. Thalarin's massive head nodded slowly. We remember those years. The Star-Weaving Confederacy shared their gravitational manipulation technology freely. The Harmony Collectives taught us advanced medical techniques. The Void Dancers showed us how to harvest energy from cosmic phenomena, all given freely in exchange for Zephyrian knowledge of crystal-based computing and atmospheric engineering. What happened to change that? Asked Noble Pexara, a younger Zephyrian whose scales showed genuine curiosity rather than defensiveness. Cirelia's voice carried sadness as she answered, "Fear. The discovery of species more technologically advanced than the Zephyrians. Instead of seeking to learn from them as equals, your ancestors chose to conquer them before they could be conquered." The Ethereal Collective, Marcus said, highlighting another entry on the display. First encountered 800 years ago, their technology was clearly superior to anything the Zephyrians possessed at the time. Instead of peaceful contact, the Empire launched a preemptive strike that devastated their homeworld. The chamber grew quiet as the weight of this history settled over the assembled nobles. Many of them were clearly learning these details for the first time. "We told ourselves it was necessary," Varan said, his emerald eyes reflecting ancient pain. "We convinced ourselves that they would have attacked us eventually, that we were protecting our people. But the truth was simpler and more shameful. We were afraid of being seen as inferior." Commander Kelvash's scales had shifted from red to a troubled orange. "Are you saying that our military doctrine is based on fear?" "Not just based on it," Marcus said gently. "It's been shaped by it for centuries. The Foundation codes recognize that fear makes beings do terrible things, which is why they require courage instead. The courage to approach the unknown with open hands instead of closed fists." Elder Voxtar spoke for the first time since opening the assembly. "Even if we accept that our historical actions violated these ancient laws, what remedy do you propose?" "We cannot undo centuries of expansion." "No," Marcus agreed, "but you can stop repeating the same mistakes. The Foundation codes include provisions for what they call restoration justice, steps that can be taken to repair damage caused by violations of the fundamental laws." The holographic display changed to show a complex legal framework that outlined procedures for reviewing forced treaties. compensating wronged species, and establishing new relationships based on mutual respect. This would require renegotiating every treaty the Empire has signed, Noble Zexira said, her scales shifting to worried yellow. Some of our tributary states might choose independence. Our resource agreements would need complete revision. Yes, Cyrelia said simply. Justice often requires sacrifice from those who have benefited from injustice. But it also creates new opportunities, Marcus added quickly. The Foundation codes don't just prohibit exploitation. They encourage the kind of cooperative relationships that made early Zephyrian expansion so successful. Instead of tribute and forced labor, imagine what you could achieve through genuine partnerships. He gestured to himself. I came here as a representative of humanity, offering trade agreements, cultural exchange, and mutual defense treaties. Humanity has technologies that could benefit the Zephyrian people, just as Zephyrian innovations could advance human civilization, but that can only happen between equals, not between conquerors and subjects. Noble Pexara leaned forward, her scales shifting to an interested blue. What kind of technologies? Medical advances that have extended human lifespan by centuries. Agricultural techniques that can terraform hostile environments. Energy systems that can harness the power of entire stars. Marcus smiled. And that's just from one species that you considered primitive. Imagine what you could learn from the 47 species you've subjugated if you approach them as partners instead of subjects. Thalarin spoke, his voice carrying the weight of millennia. The choice before you is the same one your ancestors faced when they first reached for the stars. Will you reach out with hands open in friendship, or closed in fists of domination? The Foundation codes offer you a path back to the wisdom that made your people great. The chamber fell silent as the nobles absorbed the implications of what they had heard. Marcus could see the conflict in their expressions, scales shifting through various colors as they wrestled with the reality of their situation. Finally, Elder Voxtar spoke. If we were to accept these findings, if we were to acknowledge that the Foundation codes supersede our modern legislation, what would be the first step in this restoration justice? Marcus looked up at the three keepers, then back at the assembled nobles. We start with the truth. We acknowledge what was done wrong, and we commit to doing better. Then we begin the long work of rebuilding trust with the species your empire has wronged. Starting with humanity? Voxtar asked. Starting with whoever is willing to try, Marcus replied. But yes, humanity would be honored to be the first to sign a treaty based on the Foundation codes rather than forced compliance. The Elder's scales shifted to a thoughtful purple. Very well. I call for a formal vote on the recognition of the Foundation, codes and the implementation of restoration justice, protocols. The chamber stirred, as the nobles prepared for a vote that would reshape the entire Zephyrian Empire. The voting process took 6 hours. Each noble house had to formally state their position, provide justification, and submit to questioning from both their peers and the three keepers. Marcus watched from the center of the chamber as centuries of imperial doctrine were dissected and debated. Some nobles remained defiant. Noble Kexvash, representing the military caste, argued that abandoning their expansion doctrine would make the empire vulnerable to attack from hostile species. We live in a dangerous galaxy, he declared, his scales flashing aggressive red. Weakness invites conquest. Varan responded with devastating simplicity. How many species have attacked the Zephyrian Empire unprovoked in the last millennium? Kexvash hesitated. Well, there was the Void Spectre incident, which occurred after we destroyed 3 of their research stations without warning, Cyrelia interjected. They were defending themselves from our aggression. The Crystal Hive Rebellion. A revolt by slaves we had illegally captured, Thaloran added. They sought freedom, not conquest. As the questioning continued, it became clear that virtually every military conflict in recent Zephyrian history had been provoked by the Empire's own aggressive actions. The pattern was undeniable, even to the most militant nobles. Noble Texara, speaking for the Economics Council, raised concerns about resource availability. Our tributary systems provide essential materials for our industrial base. Without forced extraction rights, we could face shortages that threaten civilian populations. Marcus had prepared for this argument. The Foundation codes don't prohibit trade or resource agreements. They prohibit coercion. The difference is that willing partners tend to be more productive and reliable than slaves. He activated the holographic display again, showing economic projections based on conversion from tributary extraction to cooperative trade. Our analysis suggests that fair value trade agreements would actually increase resource availability while reducing the massive military expenditures required to maintain control over unwilling subjects. The debate over economics led to an unexpected revelation. Noble Lexery, an elderly representative from the agricultural world, stood with shaking hands. "I must speak," he said, his scales pale with emotion. "For 3 centuries, my family has overseen food production in the Outer Rim systems. We have used forced labor from conquered species. I told myself it was necessary for imperial security." His voice strengthened as he continued, "But the humans' economic models show we could produce more food using voluntary workers with proper compensation and advanced agricultural techniques. We have been perpetuating suffering for no reason other than tradition." This confession opened the floodgates. One by one, nobles began admitting to knowledge of practices that violated the Foundation codes: forced labor, cultural suppression, exploitation of intelligent species, and worse. The chamber filled with testimonials that painted a picture of an empire built on systematic injustice. Elder Voxtar eventually called for order. "We have heard enough testimony. The question before us is clear. Do we acknowledge the supremacy of the Foundation codes and commit to implementing restoration justice? Or do we reject these ancient laws and continue with current policies?" The first vote was called. All those in favor of acknowledging the Foundation codes. Marcus held his breath as the nobles activated their voting crystals. The chamber's display showed the count in real time: glowing blue for affirmative votes, red for negative, and yellow for abstention. The final tally was closer than Marcus had hoped. 847 votes in favor, 623 against, and 234 abstentions. A majority, but not an overwhelming one. "The motion passes," Elder Voxtar announced. "The Foundation codes are hereby acknowledged as the constitutional foundation of the Zephyrian Empire." Cheers erupted from some sections of the chamber, while others remained grimly silent. But the work was far from over. "The second vote," Voxtar continued, "concerns the implementation of restoration justice protocols. This will require substantial changes to imperial policy and significant resource allocation for reparations and treaty renegotiations." This vote was even tighter. Many nobles who had acknowledged the validity of the ancient laws balked at the practical implications of enforcing them. The debate stretched on for another 2 hours. Noble Pexara surprised everyone by standing to address the chamber. "I am the youngest member of this assembly. I will live with the consequences of our decision longer than most of you. I have a question for the 3 keepers." Thalarin's massive head turned toward her. "Speak, young one. If we do not implement restoration justice now, what legacy do we leave for future generations? What happens when other species discover that our laws require justice but our government refuses to provide it?" Cyrelia's silver eyes gleamed with approval. "A wise question. The Foundation codes were written by beings who understood that justice delayed is justice denied. Every day that passes without correction strengthens the perception that Zephyrian law is meaningless when it is inconvenient. More importantly," Veron added, "other species are watching this assembly. Word of these proceedings has already spread beyond our borders. How we respond will determine whether we are seen as a people capable of growth and redemption, or as hypocrites who ignore their own laws when it suits them." Marcus saw an opportunity. "I have been in communication with the Terran Federation during these proceedings. Humanity is prepared to serve as mediators for species who wish to renegotiate their relationships with the Zephyrian Empire. We can help facilitate the transition to the cooperative model outlined in the Foundation codes." "And if some species choose complete independence?" asked Noble Kexery. "Then they choose independence," Marcus replied simply. "The Foundation codes recognize the right of self-determination for all intelligent species. If the Zephyrian Empire has nothing to offer as partners except military domination, then perhaps independence is the correct choice. But some species might choose to remain affiliated with the Empire," added Cyrelia, "if the relationship becomes genuinely beneficial rather than exploitative." Commander Kelvash, who had been silent for hours, stood slowly. "I have commanded Zephyrian fleets for over 2 centuries. I have enforced our will on dozens of species. I told myself I was protecting our people and spreading our civilization. His scales shifted through several colors before settling on a resigned blue. But listening to this testimony, reviewing the foundation codes, I realize I have spent my career violating the very principles that made our civilization worth protecting. I vote in favor of restoration justice. His announcement sent ripples through the military representatives in the chamber. If their most respected commander supported the changes, it would be difficult for others to maintain opposition. The final vote was called. This time the tally was 934 in favor, 512 against, and 258 abstentions. A stronger majority, driven largely by the shifting attitudes among the military and younger nobles. The motion passes, Elder Voxtar announced, his voice heavy with the weight of history. The Zephyrian Empire hereby commits to implementing restoration justice protocols as outlined in the Foundation Codes. The chamber erupted in a mixture of cheers, protests, and stunned silence. Marcus felt a surge of exhaustion mixed with relief. They had achieved something unprecedented, a galactic empire voluntarily agreeing to constrain its own power in service of justice. But as the chaos of celebration and argument swirled around him, Marcus knew the real work was just beginning. Changing laws was one thing. Changing an entire civilization's approach to the galaxy would be quite another. Thalarin's voice cut through the noise, speaking directly to Marcus through the translation device. Well done, human. But remember, laws written on crystal mean nothing without hearts willing to enforce them. The true test begins now. Marcus nodded, looking around at the assembled nobles whose scales displayed every color of the emotional spectrum. Some were excited about the possibilities ahead. Others were terrified of the changes to come. All of them were about to embark on a transformation that would reshape their entire civilization. Then let's get to work, Marcus said. The assembly dissolved into working groups, each tasked with addressing different aspects of the massive undertaking ahead. Treaty review committees, reparations calculation teams, diplomatic outreach coordinators, and dozens of other specialized groups formed as the nobles grappled with turning abstract principles into concrete action. As the crowd dispersed, Elder Voxtar approached Marcus. Human diplomat, you have achieved something remarkable here. But I must ask why? Why did your species risk so much to challenge our empire? Marcus considered the question carefully. Because, he said finally, we believe that justice anywhere strengthens justice everywhere. The galaxy is vast and dangerous, but it becomes less so when civilizations choose cooperation over conquest. Voxtar's scales shifted to a thoughtful purple. And if we fail? If the empire cannot adapt to these new requirements, then at least you will have tried, Marcus replied. And that's more than most empires can say. The elder nodded slowly and walked away, leaving Marcus alone with the three keepers in the emptying chamber. What happens next? Marcus asked. Cyrelia's silver form gleamed as she moved closer. Now we discover whether the descendants of the Star Riders have the courage their ancestors possessed. The courage to admit when they are wrong and the wisdom to choose a better path. And if they don't? Thalarin's ancient eyes held both hope and sadness. Then the galaxy will have one less empire, and hopefully one more federation of equals. Marcus looked around the chamber where history had just been made. No pressure at all. Varan's deep chuckle echoed off the ancient walls. Welcome to the burden of leadership, Marcus Chen of Earth. It never gets easier. 2 years later, Marcus stood in the same throne room where his diplomatic mission had nearly ended in disaster, but the space had been transformed. The ostentatious displays of wealth and power had been replaced by representations from 47 different species, each granted equal voice in what was now called the Cooperative Council of the Zephyrian Commonwealth. The three keepers still occupied positions of honor, but they were no longer confined to a pit. Thalarin, Cyrelia, and Varan served as constitutional advisors, their ancient wisdom helping guide the transformation of an empire into something unprecedented in galactic history. The final tributary world has officially transitioned to Commonwealth partnership status, reported Vextar, who now served as coordinator of restoration justice. His scales had permanently shifted to the calmer blues and greens of someone who had found purpose in redemption rather than domination. Marcus nodded, checking the datapad that tracked the massive undertaking. How many chose independence versus partnership? 18 chose complete independence with friendship treaties, Vextar replied. 23 chose various forms of association, ranging from trade partnerships to full Commonwealth membership. 6 requested time to develop their own governmental systems before making a decision. And the reparations? Completed for 31 species, ongoing for the others. The ethereal collective has been the most challenging, given the extent of damage to their homeworld, but they've agreed to accept the new terraforming technology in exchange for full restoration of their sovereignty. Marcus smiled. The ethereal collective had surprised everyone by choosing to remain associated with the Commonwealth, despite the historical trauma. Their advanced technology, freely shared now instead of taken by force, had accelerated progress throughout the Alliance. The Helix Coalition wants to present something to you, Vextar added, gesturing toward a group of crystalline beings near the chamber's center. Ambassador Resonance of Truth approached, their crystal form chiming softly with each step. Through their harmonic translator, they spoke in the musical language that had once been forbidden under Imperial rule. Marcus Chen of the Terran Federation. The Helix Coalition wishes to formally thank you for your role in our liberation. We have prepared a gift. The crystalline being gestured, and other coalition members brought forward an intricate sculpture that seemed to capture light and bend it into impossible shapes. As Marcus watched, he realized it was a representation of the galaxy itself, with thousands of tiny lights representing star systems connected by flowing streams of energy. This is how we see the Commonwealth now, Resonance of Truth explained. Not as a center controlling subordinate territories, but as a network where each node strengthens the whole. You taught the Zephyrians to see themselves as part of something greater rather than masters of something lesser. Elder Voxtar stepped forward, his ancient form moving carefully but with dignity intact. If I may add to that sentiment, human, when you challenged us 2 years ago, I thought you were destroying our civilization. I now realize you were saving it. How so? Marcus asked. The old empire was dying, Voxtar explained, his scales shifting to reflective silver. We were spending ever-increasing resources maintaining control over ever more reluctant subjects. Our brightest minds were focused on suppression rather than innovation. Our culture was stagnating under the weight of our own arrogance. Cirelia's voice carried across the chamber as she added her perspective. The Commonwealth has achieved more scientific advancement in 2 years than the Empire managed in the previous century. When beings work together freely instead of under coercion, their creativity flourishes. It was true. Marcus had watched in amazement as the transition unfolded. Species that had been forced to provide raw materials suddenly began contributing revolutionary ideas. The deep crawler's mining expertise combined with Zephyrian crystal technology had created entirely new forms of energy storage. The Windsinger's atmospheric knowledge merged with human terraforming techniques had made previously uninhabitable worlds into thriving colonies. There's something else, Fellerin announced, his massive form shifting slightly. The Keepers have made a decision regarding our future role. Marcus looked up at his ancient friend with curiosity. Oh? For 10,000 years we have served as guardians of memory and wisdom for the Zephyrian people. But the Commonwealth is no longer solely Zephyrian. We believe it is time to expand our mandate. Varan stepped forward, his emerald eyes gleaming with purpose. We propose to become keepers for the entire Commonwealth. Each member species would select individuals to serve alongside us as guardians of their own histories and wisdom traditions. The implications were staggering. Instead of 3 ancient dragons maintaining the memory of one civilization, there would be a council of keepers preserving the knowledge and wisdom of dozens of species. A galactic archive of wisdom, Marcus breathed. Not just laws and histories, but the accumulated knowledge of how to build peaceful, cooperative civilizations. Exactly, Cirelia confirmed. So that future generations, regardless of their species, will have access to the hard-won lessons of the past. Ambassador Resonance of Truth's harmonic voice expressed amazement. The Coalition would be honored to contribute our harmony weavers to such an endeavor. Our musical mathematics could help encode and preserve knowledge in ways that transcend language barriers. The Terran Federation would gladly participate, Marcus added. Our archive keepers on Luna have been preserving human knowledge for centuries. They would be thrilled to expand their mission. Vextar activated a holographic display showing the current structure of the Commonwealth. This would formalize what we've been discovering through practical experience. Each species brings unique wisdom to the alliance. The Zephyrians understand crystal-based technology and atmospheric flight. Humans excel at diplomatic bridge building and adaptive problem solving. The Helix Coalition masters harmonic sciences and crystalline engineering. Don't forget the others, added Noble Pexara, who now served as Commonwealth Minister of Cultural Exchange. The Ethereal Collective's mastery of dimensional physics has revolutionized our understanding of space travel. The Ringworld's expertise in orbital mechanics has improved every space-based project we've undertaken. Marcus looked around the chamber, taking in the diversity of beings working together. 2 years ago, most of them had been either conquerors or subjects. Now they were partners, each contributing to something larger than any of them could achieve alone. "There's a transmission coming in," announced a technician, her scales indicating she was from one of the newer Commonwealth species. "It's from beyond our borders. Someone has been monitoring our transformation." The main display activated, showing a figure Marcus didn't recognize. The being appeared to be humanoid but covered in what looked like living metal, with eyes that swirled with captured starlight. "Greetings. Commonwealth of Cooperative Species," the being said in perfect galactic standard. "I am core singer of the Transcendent Unity, representing 15 civilizations from the Andromeda Spiral. We have observed your transition from Empire to Alliance with great interest." Marcus felt his heart rate increase. First contact with beings from another galaxy was something the Commonwealth wasn't prepared for. "We face a similar challenge in our own region," Core Singer continued. "Ancient empire builders who believe conquest grants legitimacy. We have heard of your success in transforming aggression into cooperation. We would like to propose an exchange of ideas." The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. The Commonwealth's transformation hadn't just changed one corner of the Milky Way. It was being noticed across intergalactic space. Thalarin's voice rumbled with ancient amusement. "It seems, Marcus Chen, that your work here is far from finished." Marcus looked at the alien face on the display, then at the diverse assembly of beings around him. 2 years ago, he had been thrown into a pit as a joke. Now he was part of something that apparently had implications spanning multiple galaxies. "Core singer of the Transcendent Unity," he said formally. "The Commonwealth would be honored to share our experiences and learn from yours. When beings of good faith come together seeking wisdom rather than conquest, remarkable things become possible." "Indeed they do," Core Singer replied, and Marcus could swear he heard approval in the alien's voice. "We look forward to beginning this new chapter of intergalactic cooperation." As the transmission ended, Marcus stood surrounded by friends and allies who had once been enemies and strangers. The three keepers watched over them all, ancient wisdom guiding the newest chapter in galactic history. "You know," he said to Thalorin, "when I first fell into that pit, I never imagined it would lead to this." The massive dragon's chuckle echoed through the chamber. "The best journeys rarely begin where we expect them to, Marcus Chen. They begin where we choose to take the first step toward something better." Marcus nodded, looking out at the stars visible through the chamber's crystal dome. Somewhere out there, other civilizations were watching, learning, perhaps finding hope in the Commonwealth's example. The human diplomat who had been cast into the dragon pit as a joke had helped transform an empire into an alliance, enemies into friends, and conquest into cooperation. But perhaps most importantly, he had helped prove that wisdom and courage could triumph over fear and arrogance, no matter how ancient or powerful that fear might be. The dragons had bent the knee not to his strength but to his willingness to listen, and in doing so, they had taught him that true leadership wasn't about commanding others but about inspiring them to become the best versions of themselves. The Commonwealth stretched out among the stars, 47 species and counting, each one adding their own thread to a tapestry of cooperation that was becoming something none of them could have imagined alone. And this was only the beginning.